Good morning, this is your friendly talking head from the Christian channel again. I needed to show you little shots here that I thought were kind of interesting, and you're gonna whip through these things pretty quick, have fun, and I usually think about other stuff while I'm looking at situations and all that. And my wife tells me I basically roll from one story into another, and my grandfather was like that too. I inherited that from him. This was a dirty hand that was dealt. I actually bought her from the Ford place, and I went to a friend's shop to get, have him change my oil. And when we opened the box, the rubber gasket went from the filter. Of course, you need to always watch the rubber gasket and make sure it doesn't stick the filter off. And this time we opened it up, and there wasn't a filter on, there wasn't a gasket on the new filter, so that was a drag. But basically, we just used the gasket off the old filter, so it wasn't a big deal. I didn't put it on there, or if somebody stole the filter gasket for whatever, then I don't know what happened here, but that's the first time I've ever seen that. Some of you other guys that have done a lot of changes may have seen it, but it was really kind of humorous to open the box and say, well, doggone, look at them. Identify this ride. You have 10 seconds. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. In the comments, if you have time, weigh on and tell me if you ride or not. This is a Suzuki Aero, I guess you'd call that. And look at all these engine options for this doggone thing. Now, granted, 2 of them are in China, but 8 different engines, technically, that you could get in this thing, that could be in it, how it was outfitted. A lot of these platforms will only have 1 engine available. And some of them will have 2, some will have 3. But this one here has got 8, and it's that little Suzuki. I don't think they even do Suzukis here anymore. I think I heard that they had closed up shop in this country. There's still a few of them running around. The ones that really surprised me, how many of them I still driving around, are Saturns. It's an amazing thing how many Saturns are still on the road. I never particularly liked Saturns, but some of them were pretty good cars. Anyway, there's another story about that. This guy, when I started that automotive program in that city up the road, because they had commissioned me to do, I was teaching these students, and I had this, and I've talked about before, but this where you wire this up where it spins the light one way when you push one button and spins it the other, push the other button, and you're wiring it up with a couple of relays and 2 switches. And this guy said he could do this with his eyes closed, and so this other student helped her over his head so he couldn't see, and he wired this thing up and made it work with his eyes closed, which was pretty. Now this guy actually has turned out to be a really, really good mechanic. He was very sharp, and he was never a crowd follower. This guy's got leadership abilities. I don't know if anybody's following him, but he's basically the tip of the spear when it comes to tough work and doing a good job of it and all that kind of thing. You can't see his face. There he is, for what it's worth. These idiotic OEM lug nuts, I always hate things. They start out as a 19mm, then they lose their cheap tin shell, and they want an 18mm, and somebody will put a 19mm socket on them and just about round them off, get them out of there. And but one of the things that I thought was really interesting was whenever I went to teaching at the college, I would tell my students, I'd say, go over there and pull the tires and wheels off that car. And they'd come over complaining about, hey, we can't get the wheels off lug nuts, And it wouldn't be just this kind of lug nut, it would be other issues too. And it amazed me times there were problems with lug nuts and getting wheels off. I'd go over and say, what's the matter with y'all? And they sure have legitimate problems. Occasionally, somebody would have cross-threaded the doggone lug nut, and it would start spinning it on its splines in the hub. And they managed to go ahead and get it to tighten up, but then when you went to take it out, the hub stud would just spin round and round in there, and that is always a pain to deal with. Easy way, if the thing's got fancy wheels on it, you're going to mess them up. I mean, it's just, You got to be a real problem sometimes to get these wheels over here. This is a video that I took back whenever Ford Focuses first came out. And these ignition switches are very similar to this. Is one of the ones in my pickup, and I think in my Explorer now. But when they first came out, things would come apart on the inside, and you'd go to start it, and suddenly it was like you had the wrong key. Now that is not, and what you'd have to do is drill it out and get it out of there like that. But another, I have seen that same exact thing happen. The first time I saw it was on a late '80s Thunderbird. That was like, she just stuck there, and it's just all of a sudden it's like you had the wrong key. And so I had to go out there and thing out. The steering wheel was locked and everything. It came in on the hook. And if you're, right on either side of the key on some of those older Ford ones, these really hard pieces of metal that a drill bit wouldn't even scratch. And bust it up around, you have to get the wings off. Have to bust it up around there. You start the drill bit just bouncing on them pieces of little round, little cylindrical pieces on the other side of where the key went in. Have to bust that out of there. Then you drill on down in there, and then take a screwdriver and usually turn it to the on position where you could release the ignition lock cylinder and get it out of there. And if you did it right, you could do it without messing up the whole, making a big mess. And you always had to put a rag out because there's all kinds of filings that comes that thing and get, want to get that stuck in the carpet. That stuff's hard to get out of there. But there was this, I drew a ticket on a bucket truck that was from the electric company. They said it was a white bucket truck. I went out there, whenever you got a whole service lot, we're running 100 cars a day through and all that kind of stuff, they says, it won't start, and we don't know if it's the ignition or what it is. And so I says, because people get the lock cylinder confused with the ignition switch, even though they're two parts. And so I went out there, I saw a white bucket truck, stuck the key in there. Sure enough, it wouldn't turn. I said, well, I've seen this before. I'd already seen it several times by then. Bird was the first one I saw, but I'd seen it since then. I said, well, I've seen this before. Let's go ahead and this problem. And so I had a pair of pliers that were similar to these right here. I put those things on there with that key rammed in there, and I managed to crack and break that thing over to the start position. Pulled it into the shop, and I was changing out the lock cylinder when the maintenance man came up and said, why are you working on our bucket truck? And I said, what do you mean bucket truck? I didn't even know we had a bucket truck. He says, well, we just got one and this is it. And he said, understand why you're working on it. And I said, well, let me look at my ticket, and it said electric or whatever it was. And I said, oh brother, I got the wrong bucket truck. I didn't think there would be two trucks out there, but there were, and one of them was ours, and I replaced the lock cylinders for no reason. The problem on the bucket truck I was supposed to work was something else, but it wasn't the lock cylinder. And boy, that was one of those little debacle. Pretty amazing that that I managed to, you can't turn that thing with that key, even with a pair of pliers, because it tears things up and breaks. In that case, I just made it happen pretty quick. One time, when I was working down in Texas, we had a brand spanking new 1-ton Dodge pickup. It was a 1-ton Dodge that has a flatbed and has a gooseneck, hookup on the back of it. And there was a gooseneck trailer behind that thing, and on that gooseneck trailer, there's a piece of equipment. And I got a call, and they said, sitting outside is that 78 Dodge 1-ton, that copper-colored one. Nobody knows where the key is. I don't know if they lost both keys or whatever. But that thing has got to be to our offshore diving and salvaging division there, 13 miles away, and it has to be there in 30 minutes. And so you need to do whatever you need to do to get that truck going so that we can get it down to offshore diving and salvaging with that piece of equipment that's on it. And so I went out there and I hooked it was a 5-speed, you know. I didn't have the gear selector on the column. So I went out there and I hooked a jumper from the battery to the ballast resistor to fire up the ignition system. And then I reached down there, you know, made sure it was in neutral, and I reached down there with my screwdriver and started bypassing the, you know, jumping the starter solenoid. And it had that steering wheel. Well, the steering wheel locks on those old 70s Dodges was really crappy, much to it anyway. Just a little pin, you know, spring-loaded pin through a slotted plate, you know, and the pin wasn't very big, and it was in pewter in there. And so I just reached in there and grabbed the steering wheel and yanked it and broke that wheel lock. Now, we would have been in more trouble if it had been an automatic, but it wasn't. It was a feed. And from the time I got that phone call until the time they were driving the gate on that truck was 5 minutes. And that was probably one of my greatest accomplishments at thievery that was sanctioned by the people that owned the vehicle. Actually, I had never stolen a car, but you know, you always see this stuff on these silly TV shows where they always reach under the dash and they pull a bunch of wires out and they strip them with their nails, and they know exactly which wires to spark together to start the darn thing. You know, I could start an old Volkswagen Bug like that by opening the hood and getting under there, because there are only 3 wires on the switch. You know, and you could touch these 2 together and spin the starter like that and all. Anyway, I have to groan sometimes at the stuff you see. Now, sometimes it's a little more real. They'll fool around and they'll pull the sun visor down and some keys will fall out, start it and drive away on it. Anyway, if it's an old V, you can hotwire it and get it going, but if it's a newer one, it's a whole lot harder. And even though they scratched the wires with their fingernail and they managed to get it started, even if you did that, you couldn't move the steering wheel, and if it's an automatic, you take it out apart. So none of that really, and they need some technical directors or something. Anyway, the key won't turn. Now look at this one.
Come out just like that. All right, sometimes when you take this one, take it out of gear, put it back in park. You notice if you mash that, see how easy that is? That means that thing hasn't released. All right, now we're going to try to take the key out. It won't come back far enough. See, the key can't be pulled out because it won't come back far enough. And this is the reason for it. See how easy I'm pushing that? All right, now watch this. See, that's what it ordinarily would look like. And now the key will come out. All right. See, the key's coming out like it's supposed to. Let's try this again. See, this time it'll come out just fine. No problem. But if we stick it in there and we release it slowly, see how far that goes in real easy? All right, now let's try this again. See? Key won't come out. We have issues with this. Now what I can do is slap that, and then this comes out. Ta-da!
I posted that video on my YouTube channel years and years ago. I worked in the college that she said, I can't take my key out. And I found out that's what was wrong with it. And how many thousands and thousands and thousands of people have looked at that. That was on a Trailblazer. And there was one that said, look, I was at the airport and I had just parked my vehicle. I could not get the key out, and I needed to get on an airplane, and I didn't want to leave the keys in the vehicle, and I didn't know what to do. So they managed to pull that video up on their phone, and that's what the problem was. And they said that just saved them a whole lot of trouble. Imagine yourself in those circumstances. You get the key out, need to get on an airplane and go somewhere. I'm just really glad I was able to help you, even by hook and crook on that one. This is when the 2007 Expedition quit. Right out there by the driveway pulling into the college shop, this work there was trying to leave work, and her Expedition quit. And, you know, of course, that one's got a control module, so I couldn't do the test with the test light output terminal on the relay looking for a ground because it was going through that module. But I managed to find out that the pump wasn't running and that the pump was open. And whenever I got the pump out of there, somebody had run into a problem with this before or something. You see this zip tie on there, and they had just tried to cobble it together, but all oxidation and everything and the tension on the little spring thing was lost, and it basically had come loose because it just wasn't all good. But you can tell because of the current that was flowing in there how hot this got because of the resistance that had developed there. It was really nasty. So anyway, she lost the pump. We put a pump in there and we got a pigtail and fixed it so that it would do that again, you know, until a long time had passed or whatever. We got her going on that. But she did have to have a pump. You know, patching something like this is only good if you're on a trip and no pump around and you got to make it back home or something. But this was really a lousy fix that somebody did. Actually, it had come out of the connector that plugs into here, and see that got hot down there. Anyway, that is a relationship where it gets, the more oxidized it gets, the more oxidized it gets, the more resistance it gets, then it gets hotter snowballs. It was with fan motors and stuff too. Now this is a belt thing. This is something, a grout from Gates, which was really good, and Gates knows their stuff when it comes to belts. A lot of times we don't that this is how this is supposed to grip, and there's supposed to be this little channel here, water out of there. And a belt can look good. This one's all cracked, but even if a belt's cracked, if it looks like in the bottom of the grooves it's really polished, like these tips of this pulley has been polished in the bottom of those grooves, that belt is wore out, needs to be replaced. Even though it looks okay, if it's not gripping the sides of those like that, then you need another belt. And that's just the way that is. A worn belt will hide. Some of the cars that used to have the splash shield accidentally left out from under there. When I was working dealership, a car would come in and say, when I run it through a puddle, my alternator light comes on and I lose our steering. And I look under there, and the splash shield had been left off by some yo-yo that worked on it. It had to get them another splash shield. And some of those splash shields can cost more than you would think. This was the tensioner on my Explorer. This little damper was worn out in there. Now, one time I had a video about, you know, there's another video that's got lots and lots of views where we were looking at around Victoria that had a noisy belt when the air conditioner was on. If you see that tensioner bouncing the way that one was, then you need to go ahead and replace the tensioner in the belt. Now, that tensioner bouncing means the tensioner is worn out on the inside. What this is about. So when that tensioner needs changing, you don't need to be bashful about changing it. That's just the way that is, because, you know, sometimes the tensioner can be kind of pricey. If it's bouncing like that, this was the part that the graphic I showed you, the anime, was also from Gates, and like I say, Gates knows their stuff. But one yo-yo a comment on the other video, and he says, no, all you need is a pulley, you don't need the whole tensioner. And I said, what are you talking about? And he says, no, I know exactly how all this kind of stuff works, I'm a mechanic. And I said, well, do you know there's a bushing and a damper there, you know, that you don't even know? If you're just looking at this thing, you won't even know what's inside of it. And get that from Gates explains the whole thing and how it, you know, causes all that. Now, I don't know if it beats the crud out of all the components, but it's bound to do some, you know, some of that. But a new tensioner, if that thing's bouncing, is in order. I don't understand why I didn't see this in his rearview mirror. And I don't know how many times I've seen this, where there'll be the cap hanging, the lid open, and you know the guy's able to see it. So it just drives me crazy. I don't know how I could stand to drive that thing, cap swinging back there. When he went around the corner pretty fast, he probably lost some gas too, but I don't know. 7.3 that I had worked on had low fuel pressure. And they had already put a pump, the pumps in the valley between the heads on that one. It's a mechanical pump. And it actually uses high oil pressure to operate the injectors because it's got a high pressure oil pump, but the fuel pressure is like 50, 80, something like that. But this one had low fuel pressure in spite of the fact that the pump had been replaced. And what I found when I pulled this out of that filter head, and you can see where it goes right there, spring was all messed up. I don't know if the customer took it out or what he did, but this is like a relief valve for the fuel pressure. If that little relief valve, and mechanics don't know about that, even if they work on 7.3 Power Strokes, if that relief valve spring, or if the relief valve is stuck or something, you're not going to have enough fuel pressure. And that was what was wrong with this. The only thing that was wrong was that spring right there was in that, relief fuel valve. That was just a little quickie there on your 7.3. Lightning, look at that big old battery down there. Now, this is from a high explorer. You see that big old resistor right there that's all burned and scorched and all that? There's a little bit of a tip on those. This is this police interceptor. Burned up thing is caused by repeated heavy acceleration overheats that thing. There's a lot of trouble with that on Mach-E Mustangs from what one of my students, and he's a senior master Ford technician now, and he does this kind of work, and he's the one that sent me these pictures. But he says police interceptors often overheat this resistor, and so does Mach-E Mustangs, because people are trying to, drive them a little, so for what that's worth, Now this Lincoln said the rear brakes weren't. This little park brake, all that's left, and the rotor itself is completely gone. It was pretty interesting there. But this had been driven with no maintenance whatsoever. I mean, for a long, long time. And I don't know how I've seen them that come in that got no maintenance. They just drive them and drive them and drive them and drive them. And this one car salesman over there at the Ford place told me, he said, when somebody Japanese car, a lot of the times they'll have a vision for it, and they'll check every book box in the book to get everything. And I saw that when I was working at the Volkswagen Mazda dealer. A lot of what we did was them bringing vehicles in to get their little maintenance checklist done. And so that, and they give less trouble when you do what the manufacturer says you're supposed to do to go in. But people, he says, the same person that checks all the boxes on a Japanese German car or whatever will actually drive a Dodge or a Ford or Chevy, changing the oil and just beat the tar out of it, and then they'll claim it's not as good of a vehicle. But anyway, kind of funny. How about some coffee? I had this coffee table out here. I left the college and retired, and another instructor came in there. There was another college president that came. He was a young guy. I don't know what his priorities were. He came down there. There was a microwave on this table and a refrigerator in the corner, and it was a nice, friendly place. I wanted them to enjoy their experience there in addition to learning how to fix cars. And the first thing he did is come in there and he said, this coffee table needs to be gone, the microwave needs to be gone, the refrigerator needs to go to the student center if they want anything like that. And so it just changed the whole place. I'm glad that didn't happen while I was there, but it was, during the tenure of the instructor that happened, and it was a really, and this stuff wasn't in the way. It wasn't like we did for it, but he had some kind of an idea that he wanted to be a totalitarian dictator or something, I don't know. But he was a temporary president too. He's not with the president. He's not the same president that's there now. How about some Dexcool, y'all? How many times have you seen Dexcool do this kind of thing? Sometimes it's because they didn't change the coolant the way they were supposed to. They just kept on driving it. You don't cool it. I like the Motorcraft Gold coolant myself because it seems to give less problem as far as getting old than any other coolant, but I always change it on time too. So there's that, you know. Those good old big blocks, used to love those things. They would, I had heard somebody back a long time ago, you know, all the big block, you know, 390s and the bigger ones like that, you know, the 4 and all that. Somebody had told me a long years ago, and I never verified that. I took the crankshaft for a 396, and you had it standing up, and all over, it would mess up the crankshaft where you couldn't use it. You have to replace the crankshaft, it's bend it or something. I don't even know anything about whether that was true or not, but I heard a couple of play that. Whatever it was worth, some of y'all might know better, but I did a lot of work on these old, you know, and in the Fords and in the Dodges and in these, you get used to the way an engine's put together, and that's why you get kind of disgruntled when they get, you know, more and more complicated as time goes on. This lady here had a speedometer, and I ran into it. It was bouncing around. The needle bounced all over the place whenever she was driving. It was in like a mid-90s Taurus. And the speedometer was like $500 parts and labor. And she says, why do I have to spend that much money like this? Is there anything else you can do? And I said, well, let me see if I can take this thing apart and I'll see what I can do. And so I knew why the problem was happening because I understood the speedometer was put together. There's a magnet that spins inside this drum. This drum drives it. This shaft goes all the way through here and sets on the center of that magnet right there. And so what I would do on these speedometers, I fixed a bunch of them like this after this one. Took the speedometer apart, I put a drop of oil in there, and it was swimming in oil for the rest of its life. I gave that trouble again because there's a little bronze centered bushing down in here. Well, while I was taking this thing apart, this yo-yo from across the shop came over and he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm fixing this speedometer. And he said, how do you take a speedometer apart? And I said, why do you need to know this? Or why are you even asking me this? You know, this is silly. You know, you don't need to know, you know, because he was wanting to roll the miles back or something. He got it in his eyes. You could tell he had some kind of nefarious plan. But what I would always do when I would replace the speedometer is I'd pull the speedometer apart and take the drum from the original speedometer and drop so the miles would be exactly the same, even down to the 10th. You put that speedometer in there. In those days, they had a red 10ths digit on the replacement speedometer. And I used and told one customer, with that red 10th digit caused you to lose 25% of your trade value because the speedometer had been replaced and technically they didn't know how many miles were still on the vehicle. And so he came back after another mechanic replaced the speedometer and he said, like this. And the other mechanic said, I'm not doing anything about it. I've already been paid to do my work and I don't really care what happens. So then I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I kind of enjoyed doing this kind of work anyway. So I pulled it apart and dropped the drum in there. Give him the black digit back with exactly his same number of miles and all that. They had a little sticker you put on the door, but somebody could have peeled the sticker off, you know. Snap-on, Matco, you know. This one wore out and this one broke. Now this was 3/8 drive, but that one was half. That's how wore out that one was. And sometimes sockets wear out no matter who made them. How about some fuel pump waveforms? You can check the waveform on the fuel pump if you know how to do it. You make a coil of wire because you're multiplying the signal that way, and let the fuel pump, you know, by relay using this coil of wire, put it in there, hook your inductive probe with your scope on, and you can get, with the fuel pump running this pattern, if you see a raggedy pattern, the fuel pump might be running, but it's this side of failure because the brushes are and all that kind of thing. This right here is a nice good one right here. I used to have 2 fuel pumps in a big briefcase looking box, and they were clamped down to a piece of plexiglass. The bad one was good, and I could take a little portable scope I had and show how a fuel pump current trace looked like and what a good one looked like, and that was one of my training aids. I don't go into that after I left because a lot of the stuff that I had put together got raked off the table and thrown out the window. They bought super expensive training aids to replace them. This guy didn't look close enough at his new. When he put this timing cover back on, this is an oil pressure feed. It's the gasket. See how this was made? That gasket was not the right one, and oil just came squirting out of here as soon as he started the vehicle, and he was really mad. He almost blamed me, but he was the student, and he was the one that worked on the car, and he was a grown man. He should have known to compare the gaskets, you know. These two plugs were fired by the same coil for 110,435 miles. Notice this got different wear than that one, because on the coil pack ignition, whenever two coils or two plugs are being the same coil, the spark jumps out on one side and in on the other side. So it'll ground electrode on one side, and it'll wear the center electrode on the other. And so the way that juice is jumping is going to determine how much ion eats away the metal. And so that was Crown Victoria's had so that the four plugs on one bank were like this, and four plugs on the other bank were worn like that. But it was the way the wires were snaked around there and the way they were wired up, and they did this in a calculated way. Well, if you laid the plugs out that you pull out on one bank, and they got a lot of miles on them, on those old Crown Vics, they had coil packing up to 94 or whatever it was. So you lay them out on your fender, on your fender, the thing you put over there, what do they call that? Anyway, you lay this over the fender so you don't scratch your paint. Anyway, plugs on there. Look at the ones on the passenger bank, and look at ones on the driver bank. You're going to see one bank that looks like this and another bank that looks like that. I thought it was very interesting they were able to do that. That's the end of my video. We're 31 minutes and 25 seconds in. I hope you guys have a good day, and I didn't run my mouth too much today and waste your time. So leave me some comment, like, subscribe, share the video, and I appreciate you coming by. See you next week.